right, folks, welcome to the Monday edition of the Steve Malzberg Show. Great to be back with you. And, of course, today we had the funeral. We still have the funeral of Michael Brown going on. Actually, took place earlier today, and Al Sharpton giving the eulogy. And I don't know. It just seems a little strange. Wall-to-wall coverage of the funeral. While my heart goes out to the parents, we don't know what happened. We do know that he was involved in a robbery prior to getting shot by police. We hear reports that he was told to get out of the street and wouldn't get out of the street, that he pushed the car door in on the police officer, punched him in the eye socket, shot his gun, ran away, and then charged back at him. You know, I don't really get it. The media culture that we live in today, I live it every single day, do I not? I've lived it, for my whole life, and I see what we're up against here. We're not only up against the truth, we're up against the media truth, and the media truth is quite often not the truth. In this case, when officially we do not know what happened, yet the media holds the officer responsible. The media is aching for an indictment the way they were aching for his name. They'd love to have his address. They demand to see him. Why is he not showing his face? Why is he not saying anything? Because he's afraid of being killed, perhaps. There's just as good a chance, if not a better chance, that there'll be no indictment. What will the media say then? They'll react just the way they did when Trayvon Martin was found not guilty. All right, Daniel Henninger, Wall Street Journal, about to join us. But first, let's take a look at this.
You and I talked a lot, though, Reverend, after the verdict in the Trayvon Martin case. You said that needs to be a moment. Many others said the same thing. We have also seen it, as you alluded to. You led a march yesterday after another black man died. In an incident involving police in New York City. Now you are going to be giving the eulogy for yet another funeral tomorrow. What's it going to take for that moment to change things, really?
I think it's going to take legislation. Our demonstrations must lead to legislation. We need federal legislation, and we need the criminal justice system, which is why the federal government coming in is so important.
All right, folks, because my head's spinning. Let's go to Daniel Henninger, Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter, deputy editorial page editor of the Wall Street Journal, Fox News contributor. Hello, sir.
Hi there, Steve.
Can you explain to me what the heck he's talking about? These demonstrations are going to have to lead to legislation. What? Legislation that says a cop no longer has the right to defend him or herself?
Well, one has to wonder, Steve. I mean, I think what he's talking about is essentially the same old thing. More federal legislation. Ferguson is taking place 50 years after the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
As you write about in your piece, Ferguson, USA, yes.
Yeah, and in those 50 years, the amount of federal legislation that has been directed at mitigating the conditions of life in inner city neighborhoods, the amount of money that has been spent, both public and private, to try to get past those problems is virtually immeasurable. And so you have to ask, how does it come to pass that in 2014 people are still calling for more federal legislation to throw at problems that presumably have, well, I'm not going to go so far as to say that they've made no progress in 50 years, but these conditions seem to persist. And you would think that normal and sensible people would stand back and say, perhaps there has to be a better way than what we have been trying to do in the inner city neighborhoods for the past decades.
No, but you're right. It's non-specific to what he's talking about there, but he is talking about how demonstrations need to lead to legislation. One would think it's addressing, and she led into it by talking about police shootings. One would think it has to do with police shootings. And, I want to get back to your piece, but, this seems, as I've been saying, this seems like a very weird case to take to make a point about police brutality and police being out of control when we don't know the facts yet. But what we do know is what we believe to be the cop side of the story. If the cop side of the story is true, then most likely he had every right to shoot. So it's a strange case for Sharpton and the Attorney General to go down there and say, you know, it's personal for me, which I really don't understand.
Well, you know, we obviously do not know exactly what happened there, as everyone has been saying. But the idea that the federalization or nationalization of local police forces is going to solve some perceived problem, I think is really quite preposterous. If there were as many routine incidents of police brutality, if you want to call it that, as they're suggesting, we would know about it, because people like Al Sharpton and others who try to keep track of these sorts of things would be elevating it in the mind of the media, but they simply are not. I mean, 99% of police stops occur without incident, and they've been occurring, for instance, here in New York City, by and large without incident, and the effect has been to create perhaps the most livable New York City, I would say, in its history, quite frankly. And that is because you have a policing system that is alert to people who could be causing trouble in neighborhoods like that. This is not to gainsay the possibility that incidents will happen. If you get into a confrontation with the cops, you really raise the possibility of something bad happening. And clearly here, they were both the cop and Ferguson and Michael Brown were in a confrontational situation. Under those circumstances, bad things can indeed happen. Does that mean we need to federalize the police force of Ferguson? I don't think so.
Daniel, wouldn't it be wonderful if one time in any of these tragedies, and you're in New York, I hearken back to this case where, and there have been so many, but a young boy the police were looking for someone throwing some stuff off a roof by the FDR. He ran down. They thought he was a suspect. He ran into a grocery store, and they told him to come out with his hands up. He wouldn't answer them, and then suddenly he sprung up in front of one of the officers. He had a shiny thing in his hand or on his neck, and the officer shot because he thought it was a weapon. It took him by surprise. I mean, how many of the 1% of these instances that occur this way, 99% of those could be avoided if you would just teach your kids, everybody, black, white, yellow, green, when the police officer tells you to do something, you do it. If there's a problem, you adjudicate it later.
Yeah. Well, you know, the Washington Post had an article last week by a guy who's been an officer in the LAPD for 17 years, now teaches criminal justice at a university in Colorado. Daniil Cerul, I think his name was. And he made exactly that point. He said, look, if you are in a stop with a policeman, you've got to essentially do what he says, because he is trying to protect both himself and you. These are always tense situations. But the most interesting thing about that article was that he said there are all sorts of avenues afterwards to get remediation if indeed you think you have been a victim of brutality or offense by the police. But don't do it while the event is happening, because then you simply raise the possibility that someone, namely you, is going to get hurt. That is just the nature of policing.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And you know, how many times have you heard that Michael Brown was unarmed? The police officer, forget the rest of the circumstances and whatever they were, and we'll find out, but he didn't know he was unarmed. He didn't arrest him, handcuff him, or frisk him. He doesn't know he's unarmed.
Well, that's that's right. And you know, again, I have a lot of instinctive sympathy for what the police do day to day. Again, my example is the city I live in, which is New York City. And, walking around the city, you see the cops engaged with homeless people, drunks, violent situations. And, we're really asking them to do stuff that none of us would do, quite frankly. I mean, you don't want to go in there and sort of deal with someone who's lying bloody on a sidewalk. You have no idea what happened to them. And they're, the cops are the ones who kind of have to clean up for us and ensure that these cities, large and small, are kept livable. This is not
Absolutely.
to say you give them a license to do anything they
No,
want. I don't think they have that license. But it's a well-paid job, but out on the street it can get pretty crappy at times. And
That's for sure. That's for sure.
You don't want to create disincentives for them to step back and let things rip.
No, absolutely. And I'm proudly a former PBA Man of the Year here in New York City, PBA Man of the Year. So I'm a big supporter of the police. And you know what? Who in their right mind wouldn't be a big supporter of the police? I mean, God forbid you need them one day, but that aside, everything you said so eloquently is so true. They got a darn tough, dangerous job, as do the firemen in this city and all over the country as well. Daniel, always great to talk to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Great to talk to you, Steve.
Thank you. Daniel Henninger, ladies and gentlemen, Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter, deputy editorial page editor of the Wall Street Journal and Fox News contributor. It's so true. I mean, cops, there's so many things they do that you don't even hear about. You hear about the high-profile stuff. They catch a bank robber. They catch this. They have a confrontation. They avert a crime from taking place. They save somebody. But you're right, especially around the streets of Manhattan. I see it all the time. People laying in the street, people walking around the street, and that have to be moved, that have to be questioned for their own safety, for their own health, for the public good. And these cops don't know if these people are mentally ill. These cops don't know if this person has a weapon. These cops don't know if that person is drunk or something, might lunge at him, might attack him. They don't know when they go into a situation. Anyway, folks, just keep all that in mind. When we come back, it's the Malzberg panel. You know it, you love it. Don't miss it. Next.